It was supposed to be just another long evening at the restaurant, a kind of night that blended into all the others for the young waitress who moved quietly between tables. She had gotten used to the low murmur of conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the soft music that drifted through the dining room. It was a place where wealthy guests arrived in polished cars and wore clothes that looked too delicate to touch. People came there to feel important, and the staff worked hard to make sure they always did. She had learned early on that the less attention she drew to herself, the smoother everything went. So she worked with a calm, steady rhythm, serving plates, refilling glasses, clearing tables, never letting anyone see how tired she truly was. To most people in the room, she was simply part of the background, just someone who brought food and disappeared again. But underneath that quiet routine, she carried something the others didn't know, something she kept tucked away, like a secret she wasn't sure anyone would care about. She had a talent, one that was once a big part of her life, but now only lived in late-night moments when the world felt still enough for her to remember who she was before her days became filled with endless shifts. The night began like any other. The dining room was glowing with warm lights, and the smell of roasted herbs drifted out from the kitchen. She tied her apron, smoothed her hair back, and stepped into the room. Her feet already ached, though she had only just started. She greeted her first table with a small smile, the kind that felt natural, even when her mind was already racing ahead to the tasks waiting for her. Most nights, she didn't bother listening to the conversations around her. They were usually about business deals, travel plans, or expensive hobbies she'd never get near. But tonight, she found herself pausing at small moments, catching bits of laughter or excitement from tables celebrating anniversaries or promotions. It reminded her of something she used to feel herself long ago, before she accepted that her life belonged more to work than dreams. The staff was stretched thin that night, and the manager kept glancing around the room with a stressed look. He muttered something about a full reservation book and an event taking place in the lounge later that evening. She didn't ask questions. She knew better than to get pulled into whatever problem he was dealing with. Her job was to keep moving, keep serving, keep her head down. A pair of guests waved her over. She hurried to their table, balancing a tray against her hip. They asked about the specials, and she answered with the same ease she had practiced for months. She didn't stumble, didn't hesitate. Guests liked confidence. They liked to feel like the staff knew what they were doing. She gave them what they expected. As she walked away, she passed by the large glass doors leading to the lounge. A few workers were setting up shining glasses and the kind of appetizers people ate without really tasting. A grand piano sat in the corner, glossy and untouched. She couldn't help slowing down for a second, her eyes drifting toward it. She remembered the feel of keys under her fingertips, the smooth glide, the perfect weight of each note. She remembered nights when she used to play for hours, letting the world disappear around her. Back then, music felt like her way out, something powerful, something that brought people together. But life had a way of changing paths without asking for permission. She tore her gaze away and kept walking. It didn't matter now. That part of her life was behind her. She continued through the busy dining room, and the energy grew louder as more guests arrived. Laughter rose and fell like waves. Plates clattered in the kitchen, and servers weaved around each other like they were part of a choreographed routine. She stayed focused, moving from table to table until her hands began to feel numb from carrying trays. Every so often, she stole a glance toward the clock on the wall. It wasn't that she disliked her job. She was grateful for it. But she dreamed of something more than repeating the same motions every day. She wanted to feel alive again, to feel the kind of spark she used to have when she sat at a piano bench, letting melodies flow from her without thinking. At one point, a couple of guests asked if she ever listened to the musicians who sometimes played in the lounge. She nodded politely, though she didn't explain that she used to sit by the door after her shift ended just to listen. The soft piano notes helped her unwind, even when the rest of the world felt overwhelming. It was the one thing she looked forward to on the hardest days. Tonight, though, the lounge was strangely quiet. No music drifted into the dining room, and she noticed the manager pacing back and forth near the entrance. His face was tight with worry. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but his stressed gestures said enough. She turned back to her work, not wanting to get caught staring. She collected empty plates, wiped down a table, and brought out fresh sets of silverware. But as she moved, she couldn't shake the curious feeling settling in her chest. Something was going on. Guests began whispering about the upcoming private event. Some said the guests attending were influential. Others mentioned that the music planned for the event was supposed to be the highlight. She knew the restaurant liked to impress, especially when the guests had the kind of money that made everyone else nervous. The more she heard, the more she found herself glancing again toward the lounge doors. Her hands trembled slightly, though she wasn't sure why. Maybe it was because she knew exactly what that event needed to succeed. And maybe, in a quiet corner of her mind, she wondered what it would feel like to play again, not for herself, but for people who might actually listen. But she didn't let the thought go too far. It felt unrealistic, almost foolish. The restaurant wouldn't ask a waitress to fill in for a missing musician. That wasn't how things worked. Still, the piano sat there like a memory she couldn't quite escape. She continued her shift, focusing on the tasks in front of her, but her heart wasn't as steady as usual. She felt something stirring something she hadn't felt in a long time. A mix of curiosity, longing, and fear. She reminded herself that she had a job to do. The guests didn't care about her talent or her past. They cared about service, about being comfortable, about getting exactly what they ordered without delay. A group at a large table called her over, interrupting her thoughts. She poured wine, answered questions, and made sure everything on the table was arranged just right. They barely looked at her except when they needed something. She was used to that dot, but when she stepped away, she caught a glimpse of the manager rubbing his forehead while talking anxiously into his phone. His shoulders sagged, and she could only imagine the trouble he was facing. Without a pianist, the event could fall apart, and the restaurant's reputation could take a hit. She took a deep breath and returned to the kitchen for another order. The heat from the stoves washed over her, and the noise was even louder back there. Plates sizzled, cooks shouted instructions, and the air smelled of garlic and butter. She balanced the next tray carefully, avoiding a spill as a cook rushed past her dot by the time she stepped back into the dining room. The lounge was fully set up, but still no music played. Guests were starting to arrive for the private event, dressed in elegant clothes that shimmered under the lights. They walked with confidence, their voices carrying as if the room belonged to them. She kept her distance, reminding herself that she was just there to do her job. Her world was the dining room, not the lounge, and definitely not the piano. But deep down, a small part of her still wondered what would happen if someone discovered what she could really do. For now, the night remained ordinary, but the silence from the lounge hinted that something was about to change. And though she didn't realize it yet, this would be the night that brought her secret out of the shadows, a night she would remember forever. The tension in the restaurant started to grow the moment the sun dipped completely behind the city skyline. Streetlights glowed through the large windows, and the evening crowd filled every corner of the dining room. But even with all the noise, she could sense something unusual in the air. The manager had been pacing back and forth for nearly an hour, checking his phone, whispering frantically to someone, and running a hand through his hair as if that would somehow solve the problem he was facing. She tried to stay focused on her tables, but it was almost impossible not to notice the growing stress around her. The lounge area was preparing for a high-end private event, one that had been talked about all week. The guests who reserved it were said to be influential, connected, and demanding. The kind of people who expected flawless service and entertainment. And tonight, something was clearly not going according to plan. Every time she passed the lounge doors, she stole a quick glance inside. The appetizers were already lined up on polished platters, the candles placed in precise arrangements, and servers were standing by with trays of sparkling drinks. Everything looked perfect, except for the empty piano bench and the silent grand piano. She didn't want to stare, but that piano had a strange pull on her. Even from a distance, the glossy black surface looked almost inviting, like it was waiting for someone to bring it to life. And in the back of her mind, she kept hearing the same thought she had been pushing away all night. I could play, but she forced herself to stay practical. The restaurant would never rely on someone like her to fix a problem like this. She was a waitress, not a performer. They hired trained musicians, people with polished shoes and professional posture. She wore an apron with stains. She hoped no one noticed. She balanced a tray of steaming dishes as she made her way to a table near the windows. The guests there were laughing loudly, already in a cheerful mood. She served them with practiced ease, placing each plate gently on the table and checking to make sure everything looked right. "Thank you," one of the guests said with a friendly smile. She nodded, offered her usual small smile in return, and walked away. It was a simple interaction, but it reminded her of the divide between her world and theirs. They came to enjoy themselves. She came to serve them. And yet, she couldn't stop thinking about the music she used to create. Music that once made her feel seen. Back near the kitchen doors, a fellow staff member hurried past her. "The manager is losing it," he whispered. "The pianist isn't coming." She blinked. At all? Not tonight. Something about a last-minute emergency. And they can't get a replacement. Her heart skipped. She tried to hide her reaction, but the news hit her harder than it should have. Not because she cared about the restaurant's dilemma, but because part of her knew there was something she could do. Something she had spent years practicing. Something she had once dreamed of doing for real audiences. Still, she kept quiet. It wasn't her place to step in. She had learned long ago that speaking up could backfire. Staying small kept her out of trouble, but trouble was exactly what the manager was drowning in. She continued with her tasks, moving from table to table, though her mind felt scattered. She kept imagining the sound of the piano warm, steady, filling the silence of the lounge. She imagined the guests turning their heads in surprise, hearing a melody that carried emotion instead of just checking off a requirement for the event. She imagined sitting at the piano again, her fingers finding their way across the keys like old friends. The thought brought both warmth and fear to her chest. She set down a tray near the service station and took a slow breath. Her hands were trembling again, something she hoped no one noticed. Was it nerves? Excitement? A mix of both? She didn't know. The restaurant buzzed with noise, but the hush from the lounge stood out like a missing piece. People were starting to notice. Some guests asked staff members why the music hadn't started yet. Others peeked into the lounge, wondering why it felt so still. The manager finally stormed out of the lounge, frustration clear in every step he took. He stopped near the center of the dining room and rubbed his forehead. For a moment, he looked like he might actually yell. Instead, he groaned quietly and walked toward the kitchen. She watched him disappear behind the swinging doors. The rest of the staff exchanged looks, but no one said anything out loud. She could hear her heartbeat. It sounded louder than the clatter of dishes. Maybe. Maybe she could say something. Not take over, just offer. The manager could always say no. He probably would. But at least she wouldn't feel this heavy weight in her chest, this sense that she was letting the moment slip away before she even tried. But then she imagined the embarrassment. What if he laughed? What if he told her not to overstep? What if he told other staff members, and they whispered behind her back? She had worked hard to blend in, to avoid being a target for jokes or criticism. She picked up another tray and tried to focus on her work. But every step she took seemed to push her closer to a decision. She didn't feel ready to make dot. She delivered the tray to a group that had just arrived. They barely acknowledged her, too focused on their own conversations. When she turned to leave, she glanced toward the lounge again. The piano sat there untouched. Waiting got her footsteps slowed. She wasn't sure what gave her the courage. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was frustration. Or maybe it was simply that tiny spark inside her that refused to die, no matter how hard she tried to bury it. But she found herself walking toward the kitchen, knowing exactly who she needed to speak to. Inside, the noise hit her immediately. Cooks were rushing to finish orders. Pans hissed with hot oil, and steam rose from pots. The manager stood near the back, staring at his phone like it had personally betrayed him. She hesitated, swallowed, and slowly approached. Excuse me, she said softly, Dot. The manager didn't look up at first. What is it? Make it quick. Her throat tightened. This was a bad idea. She should just leave. But she forced herself to take a breath. I heard the pianist isn't coming, she said carefully. The manager let out a long, frustrated sigh. Yes, and the backup isn't answering either. And the event starts in 20 minutes. She nodded slowly. I can play. If you need someone. For a moment, he didn't react at all. Then he finally lifted his head and stared at her like he wasn't sure he heard correctly. You can play? The piano? He asked. She nodded again, feeling her cheeks warm. How well? He demanded. She opened her mouth, but the words felt tangled. She didn't want to sound arrogant, but she also didn't want to downplay herself too much. Well enough, she said quietly. I've been playing since I was young. I can handle a full set if needed. The manager stared at her again, as if trying to see something he had never noticed before. Then he shook his head. No, it's too risky. This event is too important. We can't have someone who isn't a professional messing it up. Her heart sank a little, but she expected this. She nodded politely. I understand. She turned to leave, embarrassed, but the manager suddenly grabbed her arm, not roughly, just enough to stop her. Wait, he said. You really think you can do it? You're not exaggerating? She swallowed. I wouldn't offer if I wasn't sure. He looked torn. She could almost see the calculations happening in his head. The fear of letting her play versus the fear of having no music at all. Fine, he muttered. But if it sounds off, even a little, I'm stopping you immediately. She nodded, though inside she felt like the floor had dropped beneath her. This was happening. She couldn't believe it. Go to the lounge, the manager said, pointing. Quietly. Don't make a scene, just get ready. She hurried out of the kitchen before he could change his mind again. Her hands shook so badly she had to clasp them together. Her heart thumped hard enough to echo in her ears. The lounge felt different when she stepped inside. The lights were softer, the air cooler, and people were already beginning to settle into their seats. Servers carried trays with careful precision, and the guests chatted in low, expensive voices. She approached the piano slowly, almost afraid it might disappear if she moved too fast. The polished wood reflected the light in smooth curves. The bench sat waiting. As if it had known all along she would come, she wiped her palms on her apron and sat down. Her reflection stared back at her in the glossy surface, a tired waitress with trembling hands and a heart full of forgotten dreams. But when she lifted the piano lid and placed her fingers on the keys, Something inside her steadied. The noise of the room faded. The doubt faded. And for the first time in a very long while, she felt like herself again. The moment she sat on the piano bench, the world around her felt strangely distant, almost unreal. The murmur of conversations in the lounge softened into a blur, and the soft clinking of glasses became nothing more than background noise. Her hands hovered above the keys, trembling slightly, as if unsure whether they truly belonged there. She hadn't played for an audience in years. She had played in quiet rooms, late at night, when the tiredness of her day clung to her like a heavy blanket. She had played for herself, for comfort, for memories that refused to disappear. But this was entirely different. The weight of the moment pressed against her chest. If she failed, she would embarrass her manager, the restaurant, herself. If she succeeded, she wasn't even sure what that would mean. Her life had been locked in a routine for so long that she almost forgot what hope felt like. Someone cleared their throat nearby, and she flinched slightly, realizing a few guests were glancing toward her. They didn't seem concerned or curious yet. They probably assumed she was just testing the keys or making small adjustments. Before the real pianist arrived, she took a slow breath and allowed her fingertips to rest on the keys. The familiar coolness of the ivory sent a small rush through her. Her shoulders relaxed just a little, as if her body remembered something her mind had forgotten just start. That was the only thought she held on to. The rest would follow. She pressed the first key, gently, letting a single note echo through the room. It rang out soft and clear, drifting across the lounge like a quiet invitation. No one reacted at first. The guests continued talking, unaware that this single note was the beginning of something she had feared and longed for all at once. She began to play a slow, warm melody her hands knew by heart. She didn't choose it because it was flashy or complex. She chose it because it was honest. It was a song she used to play when life felt heavy, when she needed to remind herself that beauty still existed somewhere at first. No one seemed to notice. She expected that. People at events like this were used to music being part of the background, something they didn't pay much attention to until it stopped. But as she continued, her confidence grew. Her hands moved more fluidly, her breath steadied, and the music softened the room like a warm blanket. She didn't look up. She didn't dare. She kept her eyes on the keys, letting her mind move with the melody. A few minutes passed before something shifted. The room grew quieter. The conversations dimmed. She felt the energy around her changing, though she couldn't see it. Someone at a nearby table stopped talking. Another set their drink down more gently. A small silence spread, slow at first, then all at once. She kept playing. Her hands moved with a mixture of fear and trust. She let the notes stretch, rise, and fall in soft patterns. It felt like pouring a part of her heart into the air, letting it drift out where anyone could hear it. And people listened. She could sense it without lifting her head. The room wasn't ignoring her anymore. The guests were turning toward the piano, their expressions shifting from casual interest to quiet attention. A drop of warmth spread through her chest, something like relief, but also something deeper, something she thought she'd lost. A few guests whispered softly, but their voices were no longer impatient or dismissive. They were curious, surprised. She could feel eyes settling on her, but she kept focusing on the music. She didn't want to break the moment by acknowledging it too soon. She shifted into another piece, this one slightly more emotional, with gentle rises that pulled at the heart and soft falls that wrapped the room in stillness. Her hands glided across the keys as if the piano had long been waiting for her return. She felt more alive than she had in months. Her nerves faded with each note. Instead, a quiet confidence grew inside her. She wasn't playing for approval. She was playing because, finally, she could. The music poured out of her naturally, as if it had been building inside her every day. She spent clearing tables and refilling glasses. She didn't know how long she played. Time blurred into a stream of melodies. All she knew was the feeling rushing through her, a mix of freedom, fear, and joy that made her chest feel full. When she finally let the last note of the song drift away, a soft silence followed. She hesitated, unsure whether she should stop or continue. But before she could decide, something unexpected happened. A single person clapped. The sound was soft but clear. Then another joined, then several more, within seconds. The entire lounge was filled with applause. She froze. She had never expected that. She wasn't sure what she expected, but it wasn't this. Her hands hovered above the keys. Her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she looked up. The guests were all looking at her. Some were smiling softly, others whispering to each other with impressed expressions. A few nodded at her in approval. A wave of emotion rolled through her so suddenly, she nearly forgot to breathe. She had spent so long blending into the background that being truly seen felt almost unreal. She glanced toward the entrance of the lounge. The manager stood there, motionless, staring at her with an expression she had never seen on his face. Not annoyance, not frustration, but something like disbelief. His eyes met hers for a brief moment. He didn't say anything, but the look was enough. Slowly, still watching her with the same expression, she felt her cheeks warm, not out of embarrassment, but out of something close to pride. For once, she wasn't just the girl carrying trays or cleaning messes. She wasn't invisible. She was the one who brought this room to life. A guest approached the piano, a woman dressed in elegant clothing, who carried herself with quiet confidence. She leaned forward slightly and spoke in a warm tone. "That was lovely," the woman said. "Do you take requests?" The question startled her, but she responded with a small, shy nod. "I can try," she said softly. The woman smiled and named a song. One she knew well, one she used to play during evenings when she needed comfort. Something about the request made her feel even more connected to the moment. She began to play again. This time, she wasn't nervous. The fear that held her earlier had melted away. The notes came easily, flowing like water from her hands. The room quieted again, the audience sinking into the melody. As she played, she felt a warmth spread through her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just happiness. It was a sense of purpose. This is who she had been before life got complicated. This is who she still was, hidden beneath everything else. When she finished the requested song, a soft cheer rose from the room, not loud or chaotic, but warm, genuine. She smiled before she could stop herself. The woman thanked her and returned to her seat. Leaving her hands tingling with energy. She continued to play for a while longer, moving from piece to piece, letting the music shape the atmosphere of the lounge. Guests drifted closer to the piano, some standing to get a better view, others sitting quietly with thoughtful expressions. At one point, a small group gathered near the piano, whispering in awe about how they had never heard someone play with such emotion at this restaurant before. The compliments washed over her like waves, each one reminding her that perhaps she had underestimated herself for far too long. She pushed through her final piece of the set, ending on a note so gentle it felt like a sigh. When the applause came again, it surrounded her like a soft embrace. Her heart felt full. She stood slowly, unsure what to do next. She wasn't used to attention. She wasn't used to praise. She wasn't used to being in a spotlight, literal or figurative. The manager stepped forward from the back of the room. He walked toward her with a look she couldn't read, his expression caught somewhere between worry and amazement. "I didn't know you could play like that," he said quietly, almost as if he didn't trust his own voice. She shrugged lightly. unsure what else to say. "I used to play a lot," she replied. He glanced around the room, clearly taking in the crowd's reaction. "They loved it," he said. "They really loved it." She nodded, still stunned. He paused and added, "Keep going. They're expecting more, and you've earned it." Her chest tightened with emotion. She nodded again, though words felt impossible. She sat back down at the piano. The room quieted once more, and as her fingers touched the keys again, she realized something important. This wasn't just about saving the restaurant's event. This wasn't just about filling in for a missing pianist. This was the moment she had been waiting for, without even knowing it. She wasn't stepping into someone else's spotlight. She was stepping into her own. The morning after the unexpected moment in the restaurant felt quieter than usual. The city outside was wide awake, but the young waitress moved slowly through her small apartment, still thinking about everything that had happened. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she could hear the soft echo of the piano keys under her fingers, the room falling silent, and the sound of people clapping like she had given them something unforgettable. She had never been the center of attention before, and the memory stirred something inside her that she wasn't sure how to handle. She sat by her small window with a cup of warm tea. The sky was pale with early light, and the street below buzzed with morning traffic delivery trucks, early joggers, and the slow steps of people heading to work. She watched them without really seeing them. Her thoughts were somewhere else entirely. She still remembered the faces of the wealthy guests from last night, especially the older man who had been so moved by her performance. She didn't know why his expression stayed with her. Maybe because he had looked at her not like she was a waitress, but like she had done something meaningful, something worth remembering. For a long time, she had believed her dream of playing music was far behind her. Life had become a routine of double shifts, tired feet, and quiet nights. But now, after everything that had happened, a small voice inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't done with music yet. The thought scared her, because dreams were fragile, and she had learned to protect herself from disappointment. She finished her tea and got ready for her shift. As she put on her uniform, she paused in front of the mirror. Her reflection looked the same as yesterday, but she felt different, like something invisible had shifted. She tied her apron tighter and told herself it was just another workday. But she knew it wasn't. When she arrived at the restaurant, the morning crew greeted her with curious glances. Normally, nobody paid much attention to each other. Everyone was too busy prepping tables, polishing glasses, or getting the place ready before the lunch rush. But today, she noticed a few eyes lingering on her. A server she barely knew gave her a small smile. Another whispered something to a coworker, and both of them looked at her with surprise. She wasn't used to being talked about, and it made her nervous. She walked straight to the break room and placed her bag in her locker. As she closed the door, the manager stepped inside. He wasn't a talkative man, and he usually kept his words short and his tone serious. Today was no different. "I need to speak with you," he said. Her heart jumped. She wondered if she had caused trouble. Maybe the guests had complained about her leaving her section unattended while she played the piano. Maybe what she thought was a beautiful moment was actually a problem. She followed him to his small office. He sat down behind his desk and gestured for her to sit. "You played the piano last night," he said. She nodded, unsure what to say. "The guests loved it," he continued. "I got several messages and a few calls this morning. They were asking about you." Her eyes widened. She hadn't expected that. "They want to know if you're performing here again," he said. She didn't know how to respond. "I didn't plan anything. It just happened. I'm not a real performer." He shook his head. "From what I heard, that's not true." She felt heat rise to her cheeks. Praise always made her uncomfortable. It wasn't because she didn't appreciate it. It was because she never knew how to accept it. Dot. The manager leaned forward. There's a dinner event in 3 days. A private gathering. The older man from last night is hosting it. He specifically requested that you play again. Her breath caught. She had never met someone who could request something like that. She wasn't even sure how to respond. I understand if you don't want to, the manager said. It's not part of your job. But he insisted that you would be compensated if you agreed. She stared at the manager, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. This wasn't like last night. This wasn't a spontaneous decision or a burst of emotion. This was a request, an invitation, a door opening, a door she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through. Finally, she nodded slowly. I can play. The manager gave a rare hint of a smile. Good. I'll let them know. As she stepped out of the office, she felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. She returned to the dining room, where early customers were beginning to take their seats. She grabbed her notepad and went back to work, trying to focus on taking orders and carrying plates. But her thoughts kept drifting to the piano during her break. She sat outside behind the restaurant, where the alley was always calm. The sun was high now, warming her shoulders. She closed her eyes and let herself breathe. She didn't have a proper piano at home. Only a small keyboard that didn't feel the same. But she knew she needed to practice before the next performance. She thought about asking someone if she could use the restaurant's piano after hours, but she wasn't sure if that was allowed. Still, it was her only option. After her shift ended, she approached one of the evening supervisors and asked if she could stay a little longer to practice at the piano. The supervisor hesitated, but eventually agreed, as long as she didn't disturb customers. She thanked them softly and waited until the last guests finished their meals. The dining room slowly emptied, and the lights dimmed slightly for closing time. When the final customer left and the staff began cleaning up, she quietly walked toward the piano again. It waited in the corner, polished and silent. She ran her fingers lightly across the keys. Even without sound, the touch of it brought back memories of her teacher years ago, of school performances, of moments when she had believed she might do something more with her music. She sat down and let her hands settle into place. She took a deep breath and pressed the first key. The notes spread softly through the empty room, warm and full. She played slowly at first, like she was introducing herself to the piano all over again. Then she let herself go, playing songs she remembered from her childhood, pieces she had practiced endlessly when she was younger. Her fingers moved more confidently with each passing minute. The world outside faded away. The clatter of dishes being washed in the kitchen seemed far away. She closed her eyes and let the music guide her. After a while, she heard someone clear their throat. She opened her eyes and turned to see the older man from the night before standing a short distance away. She hadn't heard him come in. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I thought the restaurant was closed, he smiled gently. It is. But I asked if I could stop by. She stood up, unsure what to do with her hands. I wanted to thank you again, he said. Your performance last night, it meant more than you know. She swallowed, feeling shy. I didn't think anyone would notice. Everyone noticed, he said with a warm laugh. But I especially noticed. The music reminded me of someone I cared about very deeply. Her expression softened. She didn't ask who it was. He didn't need to explain. I hope you'll play again at the dinner, he continued. It would be an honor to have you there. I'll be there, she said quietly. He nodded, satisfied. Good, I look forward to it. Before he left, he reached into his pocket and handed her a small envelope. She looked at it with confusion. Just something to help you prepare, he said when he walked away, and the door closed behind him. She opened the envelope. Inside was a simple note with a kind message and enough money to buy a proper keyboard or rent a practice space for a few days. Her eyes filled with emotion, not because of the amount, but because of the gesture. Someone believed in her. Someone thought her music mattered. She sat back down at the piano and placed her hands on the keys again. Her heart felt lighter, and the uncertainty she had carried all morning slowly faded as she played once more. The empty restaurant filled with warm music that rose and fell like a promise she was finally brave enough to keep. The 3 days leading up to the private dinner passed more slowly than she expected. Each morning she woke up with the same mixture of nerves and hope, and each night she went to bed wondering if she would be good enough for what was coming. Even though she had played her whole life, something about performing again after so many years made her feel exposed in a way she wasn't prepared for. It wasn't like playing at home or sitting at the restaurant piano in an empty room. This time people would be listening, and not just anyone. People who lived lives far from anything she had ever known. But she was determined not to let fear take over. After receiving the envelope from the older man, she used part of the money to rent a small practice room in a nearby music studio. It was nothing fancy, just a narrow space with a window facing a hallway and a slightly worn upright piano, but it was more than enough. The moment she sat down and played her first chord in that room, she felt her confidence returning. Every day after work, she walked straight to the practice studio, her steps tired, but her mind focused. She practiced for hours, sometimes until her fingers ached. She played the pieces she remembered from her childhood, the songs that shaped her teenage dreams, and new melodies that came to her out of nowhere, as if they had been waiting for her. To find them, she didn't tell many people about the upcoming performance. Only a coworker she trusted knew, and even then she kept the details vague. She didn't want attention. She didn't want people asking her questions she wasn't ready to answer. This moment felt too personal, too delicate. It was something she wanted to hold quietly, like a secret she wasn't ready to share. On the third day, the day of the dinner, she woke earlier than usual. She opened her curtains and watched the sunlight slowly creep across the buildings outside. The city felt peaceful, as if it understood she needed a moment of calm. She took her time getting ready. She didn't have fancy clothes, and she didn't want to pretend to be someone she wasn't. Instead, she chose a simple black dress she had owned for years. It wasn't expensive, but it was soft and comfortable, and it made her feel like herself. Before she left for the restaurant, she sat at the edge of her bed and closed her eyes. She wasn't praying, at least not in the traditional sense. She was just asking for courage, just enough to get through the night. When she arrived at the restaurant, she noticed immediately that the atmosphere was different. The staff was setting up the private room, and everything looked more elegant than usual. Soft lights, polished silver, fresh flowers on each table. The private dinner wasn't huge, just about 20 guests, but everything was prepared with great care. The piano had been moved to the far corner of the room so the guests could see her, while still enjoying their meal. She felt a flutter in her chest when she saw it. This was real now. There was no going back. The manager approached her. "They'll arrive in an hour," he said. "You can settle in and warm up if you want." She nodded and walked to the piano, placing her fingers gently on the keys. She didn't play right away. She just sat there, letting herself get used to the room, the lights, the quiet hum of soft conversations from the staff. She closed her eyes and took a slow breath. Finally, she played a few notes, soft, steady, warm. The sound filled the room, smooth and familiar. She felt her heartbeat slowing. She played a little longer, just enough to loosen her fingers and quiet her mind. Soon the guests began to arrive. She stepped aside, letting the servers do their work. She wasn't sure where to look or how to stand without drawing too much attention, but she did her best to stay calm. The older man from the previous night arrived last. When he saw her, he gave a kind smile and walked over. "I'm glad you came," he said. "Thank you for inviting me," she replied softly. "You don't have to be nervous," he added. "Just play the way you did before." His words helped more than he knew. When all the guests were seated and the dinner officially began, the manager gave her a small nod. It was time. She walked to the piano, each step feeling heavier than the last. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and took a deep breath. The room was quiet now. Even though people were seated far from her, she could feel their eyes on her. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. For a moment, the room faded away. The soft music rose from the piano like a gentle wave, and she let herself sink into it. But halfway through the first piece, something unexpected happened. She became aware of the room again. She could sense the attention, the stillness. She wondered if she sounded good enough. She felt her confidence waver. Her hands hesitated, but then she remembered the long nights practicing, the quiet encouragement of the older man, the small spark she had felt the first time she played at the restaurant. She reminded herself that music wasn't about perfection. It was about feeling. And if she could give the room even one honest moment, then it would be enough. Her fingers steadied. She continued playing, letting her heart guide the music. She played 3 pieces in total. The first was a soft melodic tune from her childhood. The second was a more emotional piece she had written quietly in her apartment months ago, but never shared with anyone. And the third was a simple, hopeful melody she had come up with just 2 days earlier while practicing at the studio. When the last note faded, the room stayed silent for a breath, just long enough to make her doubt everything. Then the applause began. It wasn't loud or wild. It wasn't the kind of clapping you'd hear in a concert hall, but it was genuine, gentle, warm. It felt like the kind of applause meant for someone who had touched the room in a quiet way. She felt her throat tighten. She stood up slowly and bowed her head slightly, feeling both overwhelmed and grateful. As the dinner continued, many of the guests approached her one by one. They complimented her performance, asked how long she had been playing, and encouraged her to continue. Some were elegant and soft-spoken, others more direct, but all of them were kind. The older man approached her last. "You played beautifully," he said. "Thank you for sharing this with us." "Thank you for giving me the chance," she said. He looked at her with thoughtful eyes. "Have you ever considered doing this more seriously?" She let out a small breath of disbelief. "I used to think about it, but life got in the way." He nodded slowly. "Life does that. But sometimes it also gives us another chance." She didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to people believing in her. Before he walked away, he said something that stayed with her long after the night ended. "Your music has a way of making people feel something real. Don't lose that." After the dinner, when the guests began leaving and the staff returned to cleaning up, she stayed at the piano for a moment longer. The room was quieter now, almost empty. She rested her hands on the keys, but didn't play. She thought about the girl she used to be, sitting at her childhood piano, dreaming about a future filled with music. She thought about the years she had put that dream aside, convincing herself it was impossible. And now she thought about the feeling she had tonight of being heard, of being seen. She wasn't ready to make promises to herself yet. She didn't know what the future would look like. But she did know one thing. She wanted to keep playing, and for the first time in many years, she believed she might have a reason to try. As she finally stood up from the piano and prepared to go home, she felt something new rising inside her, not fear, not doubt, but possibility. The night after the private dinner felt strangely quiet. When she got home, she placed her bag down and sat on the edge of her bed, still wearing the same simple black dress she had worn to the restaurant. She didn't turn on the lights. She didn't need to. The moonlight through the small window was enough to soften the room into something gentle and safe, that her mind was still full of everything that had happened. The applause, the smiles, the kind words, the way the older man had looked at her with warmth, like he truly believed she had something special. She tried to replay every moment, as if she was afraid they would disappear if she didn't hold on tight enough. It all felt unreal, like she had stepped into a life that wasn't hers, yet the music had been hers. That part was real. She leaned back slowly and lay down, still in her dress, staring at the ceiling. She let out a long breath. For so many years, she had lived in the steady rhythm of early mornings, long shifts, and quiet nights. Her life had felt predictable, almost small. But now something new had entered that routine. Not fame, not success, just possibility. And possibility was sometimes even more powerful. She finally changed into comfortable clothes, washed her face, and sat by the window. It was late, but she wasn't tired anymore. She felt wide awake in a way she hadn't felt in years. She decided she would go to the practice studio again the next day, not because of any event or request, but because she wanted to. For the first time in a long time, she wanted to play for herself. The next morning, she woke early. The sunlight filtered in softly, and she stretched slowly, feeling calm instead of rushed. After breakfast, she went to work as usual, but the feeling inside her was different. The restaurant looked the same, the tables, the lights, the polished silver, but she didn't feel like the same person walking through the doors. Her coworkers noticed something too. A few of them smiled at her with curiosity, as if they sensed she was carrying a quiet joy. Someone asked her how the private dinner went, and she gave a simple answer. "It went well," she said with a small smile. She didn't say more. The moment was too personal, too meaningful to turn into gossip. During her lunch break, she sat alone behind the restaurant, enjoying the warm air. She took out her phone and searched for something she had been too afraid to look up before. Local music schools, open mic nights, community performances. She didn't know what she was looking for exactly, but she felt drawn to the idea of stepping into a world she had left behind. A coworker called her back inside, and she returned to the rush of lunchtime orders. The day passed quickly, and as soon as her shift ended, she went straight to the practice studio. When she opened the door to the small room and saw the upright piano waiting for her, her heart lifted. She sat down and played without hesitation. The music poured out of her in a way that surprised even her. It felt free, unforced, like she was rediscovering a part of herself she had forgotten. As she played, she noticed someone standing outside the small window of the room. It was a young man carrying a guitar case, waiting for his own practice session. He wasn't staring rudely, just listening, with a kind expression. When she finished the piece, he gave her a nod, a silent gesture of appreciation. It was small, but it meant something. She left the studio that evening feeling lighter, as though each note she played loosened a knot inside her. She walked home under the streetlights, her steps unhurried. The next few days followed a new pattern. She worked her shifts, then went straight to the studio to practice. She kept to herself, not making a big deal out of it, but every evening she found comfort in the music. It no longer felt like she was preparing for something. It felt like she was returning to something. One afternoon, as she was cleaning tables at the restaurant, the manager approached her. "You have a visitor," he said. Her first thought was that the older man had returned. But when she walked toward the front of the restaurant, she saw a woman she didn't recognize. She was well dressed, maybe in her 40s, with a calm but confident posture. "Hello," the woman said kindly. "Are you the one who played at the private dinner the other night?" The young waitress nodded, unsure what to expect. I'm a friend of the gentleman who hosted the event, the woman continued. He couldn't stop praising your performance. He said your music felt honest. The young waitress felt warmth rush to her cheeks. The woman smiled gently. I run a small community arts center not far from here. We host small concerts, local performances. Beginner showcases mostly for people who want to share their talent but don't have big platforms yet. The young waitress listened carefully, her heart beating a little faster. We would love for you to perform at one of our upcoming evenings, the woman said. It's nothing formal or intimidating. Just a warm space for people who love music. The young waitress felt frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the sudden opportunity. I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that, she said softly. I haven't performed in years. That's exactly why you should, the woman said kindly. There's no pressure. Just a chance to share what you love. She handed the young waitress a small card with the center's name and a phone number. Think about it. No rush. After the woman left, the young waitress held the card in her hand for a long moment. This was different from the private dinner. This wasn't a one-time event. This was an invitation to step into something bigger, something she wasn't sure she was ready for, but she didn't throw the card away. That evening, after her shift, she walked slowly instead of rushing to the practice studio. She let herself think carefully. She didn't want to rush into a decision. She wanted to choose it because she believed in herself, not because someone else believed in her. She reached a small park near her apartment and sat on a bench. The air was cool, and the sky had turned a soft shade of blue. People walked by with their dogs. Kids played on the grass, and the world felt calm. She took out the card and stared at it again. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the choice. For so long, she had lived a life shaped by necessity. Work, bills, routine. Music had always been pushed aside as something impractical, something unrealistic. But now, for the first time in her adult life, someone had not only noticed her music, but believed in it enough to offer her a stage. She closed her eyes, letting the evening breeze brush her face. She pictured herself on that small stage at the community center. She imagined sitting at the piano, sharing her music with a room full of strangers who came to listen. She imagined the same warmth she had felt during the private dinner. When she opened her eyes, she knew the answer. She wasn't chasing fame. She wasn't expecting her life to suddenly change. But she wanted to say yes. She wanted to step into that possibility, even if it scared her. The next morning, before work, she called the number on the card. The woman answered with a cheerful greeting. I'd like to perform, the young waitress said in a steady voice. If the offer is still open. It is, the woman replied warmly. And we're happy to have you. The performance was scheduled for 2 weeks later. The young waitress spent those days practicing not out of fear, but out of excitement. She began writing new pieces, short melodies, inspired by her own life, by quiet nights, by moments she thought she had forgotten. She filled a small notebook with ideas, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. When the day of the community performance finally arrived, she wore the same simple black dress. She didn't need anything else to feel like herself. The art center was cozy, with soft lights and a small stage. People filled the seats, families, students, older couples, curious locals. They weren't wealthy guests or important business figures. They were ordinary people who simply loved music. When she stepped onto the stage, she felt the familiar flutter of nerves. But then she saw the older man sitting quietly in the second row. He had come. He gave her a gentle nod, the same encouraging look he had given her before. She sat at the piano and took a deep breath. And then she played. This time, she wasn't playing out of fear or hope for approval. She wasn't playing to prove anything. She played because the music inside her finally had room to breathe. Her fingers moved freely, and the room became still. She played the new melodies she had written in the past weeks, music shaped by her journey, by small moments of courage, by the quiet belief that she deserved to be heard. When she finished, the applause that filled the room felt like sunlight warm, sincere and full of life. She bowed her head, her eyes bright with emotion. She had done it. After the performance, people approached her with smiles and gratitude, telling her how much they enjoyed her music. The older man came to her last. "You've grown," he said softly. "Your music feels brighter now." She smiled. "I think I finally believe in myself." He nodded. "And that makes all the difference." As she walked home that night, the city lights sparkling around her, she felt something settle gently inside her, and challenges to face. But now she had something else too, a dream she was finally brave enough to follow.